The hospital waiting room had a particular kind of silence that night. Not peaceful, just exhausted. The kind of silence that settles in after everyone has already cried what they had and can't find anything left. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, one of them flickering every few seconds in the corner above the vending machine, casting a pale, unsteady light across the rows of gray plastic chairs. Vince Marlowe sat in one of those chairs with his coat still on, a paper cup of coffee going cold between both hands. He hadn't taken a sip in 20 minutes. He wasn't there for himself. He'd driven his neighbor's dog to the emergency vet 2 weeks ago without a second thought, but sitting here in a human hospital, in this particular waiting room, felt different. Heavier. He was here because his daughter had called him from her classroom that afternoon, saying her stomach hurt so badly, she couldn't sit up straight, and by the time he'd left work mid-shift and driven across the city, they'd already taken her back behind the double doors, and told him to wait. Her name was Rosalind. She was 7 years old. She called her stuffed rabbit Gerald, after her grandfather, and she slept with him, tucked under her left arm every single night without exception. Vince was 38. He'd been raising Rosalind on his own for 3 years, ever since her mother had left. Not dramatically, not with a fight, but quietly, gradually, until one morning she simply wasn't there anymore, and the space she'd left behind was so ordinary and so enormous at the same time, that Vince hadn't known what to do with it except keep going. So he kept going. He worked shifts at a packaging plant on the east side of the city, dropping Rosalind at school before 7 a.m., and picking her up from aftercare at 5:45, and on the days when his schedule ran over, Mrs. Pelletier from next door would sit with her until he got home. That was the whole of their life. It worked. Most days, it worked. But tonight his daughter was somewhere behind those doors with her stomach in knots, and he was out here, alone, holding coffee he couldn't drink, watching the fluorescent light flicker. He tried to remember the last time he'd eaten. Lunch, maybe. A granola bar from his locker at 1:45. That had been 8 hours ago. He hadn't thought about food once until this moment, and now that he did think about it, he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a proper meal sitting down. Not standing over the sink. Not in the car. Actually sitting down. He set the coffee on the empty seat beside him and rubbed his face with both hands. The waiting room was mostly quiet. A couple in the far corner, the woman asleep against the man's shoulder. An older gentleman near the door reading a paperback, turning pages with careful deliberateness, like a person filling time rather than enjoying a story. A young woman across the aisle with her leg bouncing steadily, earbuds in, staring at the floor between her feet. And then, a few chairs down from Vince, a boy. He looked about 8 or 9, sitting very still in a way that children usually don't. He was wearing a winter jacket that was a size too small, the cuffs barely reaching his wrists, and he had a backpack on his lap that he was gripping with both hands like he needed something to hold on to. His eyes were fixed on the doors, the same double doors Rosalind had gone through. And his expression had that particular quality that Vince recognized immediately, because he'd seen it in the mirror 3 years ago. It was the look of someone waiting to find out how bad the news was going to be. Vince watched him for a moment. The boy didn't move, didn't look around, just stared at those doors. After a minute, Vince leaned forward. "You doing all right over there?" The boy blinked, turning his head slowly like he'd forgotten anyone else was in the room. "Yeah," he said. Then, after a pause, "My mom's in there." Vince nodded. "My daughter's in there too." The boy looked at him, really looked, for the first time. Something in his face shifted, very slightly. "You?" "She's 41. A beat. My mom, I mean. Not me, I'm 9. Vince almost smiled. "Right, what's your name?" "Caden, I'm Vince." He glanced at the backpack. "You been here a while?" Caden nodded slowly. "Since after school. Mrs. Arsenault drove me. She's a teacher, she couldn't stay." He said this without any particular emotion, like he'd already processed the fact of being left alone and filed it somewhere manageable. "They said someone would come, a family friend. But I don't think she's coming now, it's late." Vince looked at the clock on the wall. "Nearly 9:30. Is there anyone else you can call?" Caden shook his head. "It's just me and my mom." There it was. The whole weight of it, in 6 words, delivered so plainly that it almost didn't land, until it did. "It's just me and my mom." Vince had said almost the same thing himself, in different order. "It's just me and my daughter." He knew exactly what that sentence contained. Every contingency plan that didn't exist, every emergency contact that came up short, every moment of realizing that the net you assumed was under you wasn't quite as wide as you'd hoped. He looked at Caden and saw, with a clarity that caught him off guard, what this boy's night looked like. Sitting in this chair, jacket too small, nobody coming. Staring at those doors and trying to be old enough to handle it. Have you eaten anything? Vince asked. Caden hesitated. Then he unzipped a small pocket on the front of his backpack and held up half a granola bar still in its wrapper. I had this from lunch. I saved the rest. Vince stared at it. Half a granola bar. Saved. The boy had been rationing. Come on, Vince said, standing up. There's a cafeteria on the second floor. I saw it when I came in. Caden looked uncertain. What if someone comes to tell me about my mom? We'll tell the desk where we're going. They can come get us. Vince picked up his cold coffee. And you can bring your backpack. The hospital cafeteria was quiet at that hour, the dinner rush long finished, and the late-night staff not yet settled in. A few nurses sat at a corner table. A man in a fleece vest typed at a laptop by the window. The serving station was mostly put away, but the woman behind the counter, her name tag read Deb, looked up when they came in and didn't seem bothered by the hour. Kitchen's closed, she said. But I've got soup still on, and I can do a grilled cheese if you give me 5 minutes. That'd be perfect, Vince said. He ordered 2 bowls of soup and 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. When he reached for his wallet, he did the mental calculation he'd been doing for 3 years. The automatic one. The one that runs in the background whether you want it to or not. He knew what was in his account. He knew the hydro bill was coming out Thursday. He ordered anyway. They sat down at a table near the window, where the dark glass reflected the room back at them like a quiet mirror. Caden set his backpack on the chair beside him. He didn't take his jacket off. You can take your coat off if you want, Vince said. It's warm in here. I know, Caden said. But he didn't take it off. Vince didn't push it. Deb brought the soup first, tomato, from a big pot that had been going since noon. Probably, the surface of it just barely still warm. She set a basket of crackers between them without being asked. Caden looked at the bowl for a moment, then he looked at Vince. You don't have to pay for me, he said. I have some money. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handful of change. Quarters, loonies, a couple of toonies, the kind of collection a kid assembles from coat pockets and between couch cushions over months. He counted it carefully on the table. $3.65. Vince looked at it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Put that away, he said finally gently. I've got it. Caden looked at him. Are you sure? Yeah. Vince picked up his spoon. Eat while it's warm. Caden put the coins back in his pocket. He picked up his spoon. He tried the soup carefully, the way kids do when they're not sure if something is too hot, then took another spoonful. He didn't rush. He ate steadily, quietly, with a focus that Vince recognized, the focus of someone who is very hungry but doesn't want to look it. The grilled cheese arrived a few minutes later, cut diagonally, the cheese still pulling away in strings from where Deb had pressed it on the grill. Caden looked at it like it was something significant. This is really good, he said, after the first bite. Yeah, Vince agreed. His own sandwich tasted better than it had any right to. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until this moment, sitting across from this boy in a hospital cafeteria at nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night in November. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the waiting room. Less heavy. What does your mom do? Vince asked after a while. She cleans offices, Caden said. At night. She works nights and I stay at my friend Devin's house usually, but Devin's family went to Moncton this week. He picked up the second half of his sandwich. She hurt her back last month and they made her come back to work too soon, I think. That's why she collapsed, her back. Vince nodded slowly. Is she going to be okay? Caden asked. He wasn't looking at Vince when he said it. He was looking at the table. I don't know, Vince said. He thought about giving him something softer. Something more reassuring. But Caden was 9 years old and had been sitting alone in a waiting room for hours and had $3.65 in his pocket and had saved half a granola bar from lunch. He wasn't a kid who needed to be managed. He needed to be talked to straight. But she's in the right place. And the fact that she got here when she did, that matters. Caden nodded once, like he was filing that away too. My dad left when I was 4, he said then, unprompted, in the same matter-of-fact tone. I don't really remember him. Vince was quiet. My mom works really hard, Caden continued. She says we're going to be okay. She says it a lot actually. He paused. I think she says it for me. Not because she always believes it. Vince set his spoon down. He thought about all the times he'd said the same thing to Rosalind, in the car, before school, in the dark of her bedroom when she'd had a bad dream. We're going to be okay, Roz. He meant it every time. He also knew that meaning it and being certain of it were two different things, and that Rosalind would understand that distinction someday, and it would break her heart a little, and his too. She believes it, Vince said. She just worries too. Those two things can both be true at the same time. Caden looked at him. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. Like the sentence had settled somewhere useful. They finished eating. Deb came to clear the plates. Vince told her to keep the change from a 20, and she thanked him in a way that was plain and genuine, not performative. The cafeteria was quieter now. Should we go back down? Caden asked. Yeah, Vince said. Let's go check. They rode the elevator down in silence, side by side, Caden with his backpack straps held in both hands again. When the doors opened and they walked back into the waiting room, the man at the desk looked up and said, "Are you with the boy? Caden?" Caden straightened immediately. "Yeah, that's me. The doctor wants to talk to you. Your mom's stable. She's resting. You can go back and see her in a few minutes." Caden exhaled. It was a small sound, almost inaudible, but Vince heard it. The sound of a 9-year-old releasing 3 hours of held breath. His shoulders dropped about an inch. He nodded at the desk clerk and said, "Thank you," the way someone says it when they really mean it. Then he turned to Vince. "She's okay," he said. "She's okay." Vince agreed. Caden stood there for a second, and then he did something unexpected. He unzipped the front pocket of his backpack, the same one where he'd kept the granola bar, and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, pencil crayon on white paper, a house and 2 figures and a sun with straight lines radiating out from it. The kind of drawing that lives on refrigerators and gets carried around in backpacks for reasons kids can't always articulate. He held it out to Vince. "It's not really anything," he said, "but you can have it." Vince took it. He unfolded it carefully. The 2 figures were clearly a woman and a small boy, the boy with a backpack. The house behind them had a yellow door. Under the figures in careful block letters it said, "Me and Mom." He looked at it for a long moment. "This is yours," he said. "I know," Caden said, "but I want you to have it. Because you were nice." He said it simply, in the same plain, unsentimental way he'd said everything else, and somehow that made it land harder than any elaborate gesture could have. "You were nice to me." Vince folded the paper gently back along its original creases and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, close to his chest. "Take care of your mom," he said. "I will," Caden said. "I hope your daughter feels better." "She will," Vince said. And this time, he meant it in the certain way. Caden turned and followed the desk clerk through the double doors. Vince watched them go. Then he sat back down in the gray plastic chair, in the flickering light, and waited. 20 minutes later, a nurse came out and told him Rosalind was asking for him. She had a stomach infection. Treatable, nothing serious, but they wanted to keep her overnight for fluids and observation. She was in a room on the 3rd floor. She had asked specifically whether he'd brought Gerald, the rabbit, and when the nurse had told her she wasn't sure, Rosalind had made her promise to find out. He hadn't brought Gerald. He'd been too scared to think about anything except getting to the hospital. He made a note to himself to call Mrs. Pelletier in the morning, first thing, and ask her to bring the rabbit over. When he walked into Rosalind's room and she looked up at him from the pillow, pale and tired but clearly relieved, he sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. She didn't squirm away or complain about it being too tight. She just held on. "I'm sorry I didn't bring Gerald," he said into the top of her head. "It's okay," she said. "You came." He drove home at midnight. The streets were wet and mostly empty, the traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one. He took the long way, not quite ready to go back to the quiet of the apartment. He drove past the school, past the park where they went on Sunday mornings, past the bakery on Girard Street, where Rosalind always asked for the croissant with the icing on top. He thought about Caden on the bus ride home, or wherever he'd be sleeping tonight. Probably a chair beside his mother's bed, probably still in that jacket, probably with his backpack still in his lap. He thought about the drawing tucked into his coat pocket. "Me and Mom," in block letters, the yellow door, the sun with the straight lines. He thought about his daughter, 3 floors up, sleeping now probably, with her IV in and her hair messy on the pillow. He thought about how strange and fragile and ordinary all of it was. All of them, just people in buildings in the dark, doing their best with what they had. When he got home, he didn't go straight to bed. He sat at the kitchen table for a while in the dark, without turning on the light. He took the drawing out of his coat pocket and smoothed it flat on the table in front of him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he got up, opened the kitchen drawer, found the small magnet shaped like a maple leaf that Rosalind had picked up from a school trip to Ottawa, and he put Caden's drawing on the refrigerator. It fit right in, among the finger paintings and spelling tests, and a birthday card Rosalind had cheated for him last April, with a lopsided cake on the front and the message inside that read, in careful, first-grade letters, "You are my best dad." He stood there looking at all of it for a moment. This little archive of their life, held up by magnets, evidence of the years they'd built together out of nothing much except showing up. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. In the morning, he called Mrs. Pelletier about Gerald. She brought the rabbit over at 8 o'clock sharp, wrapped in one of Rosalind's blankets like a small patient of his own, and when Vince carried it into Rosalind's hospital room and she saw it, she reached out her arms and held it so tight that the nurse laughed. And Vince stood in the doorway of that room, on the 3rd floor of the hospital, and watched his daughter hold her rabbit. And thought about a boy in a jacket that didn't quite fit, somewhere else in this same building, who had given away his best drawing because someone had been kind to him when he needed it. He thought, it doesn't take much, it really doesn't take much. And maybe that's the whole of it, really. Not the grand version, not the version that announces itself. Just the version that shows up in a hospital cafeteria at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. Orders 2 bowls of soup and says, eat while it's warm. The version that quietly makes space for someone who is trying so hard to hold it all together and doesn't know quite how to ask for help. That's the version that stays. That's the one you carry home and put on the refrigerator and still think about, weeks later, when you're standing in your kitchen in the dark.